Bonjour. Good day. I want to raise a couple of concerns before I take your questions. First off, we are receiving more and more information around the Omicron variant and how serious it is and how much of a risk it poses. So I want to encourage everybody, again, follow all the best public health guidelines. As a party, we met in caucus virtually, and we're going to have a reduced number of MPs in the House in response to the information that we've received. And again, I encourage everybody follow the best advice that you receive from public health experts. A couple of things that we do want to indicate to people is that the three things that we're calling for in specific things that we want the federal government to do. We need a better approach to vaccination. It's clear that the federal government can play a better role in making sure people get access to all the doses, the extra booster shot, and those doses are available, but we need a plan to make sure they get into people's arms. It's not good enough that they're just available. Three things in specific that we want to see the federal government support or put more emphasis on. One, accelerating access to the booster shot. We need to make sure people get it. We need to make sure it's clear, the plan to do it, and we need the federal government to work with a national strategy, working with provinces and territories to make sure we're doing everything possible to get people the booster shot. Secondly, we need to support provinces and territories with access to rapid tests. There is a very complex layout across Canada, with provinces having different rules or different availability of rapid tests. The federal government has to play a role in making sure people have access to rapid testing. So that's something that the federal government can do and support. And finally, given how there's already been a crisis in our healthcare system and the Omicron variant has serious repercussions and a real danger of increasing those already difficult situations in healthcare, untenable situations in healthcare, we want to see an immediate and rapid response to hiring more healthcare workers and supporting the hiring of more frontline healthcare workers in specific. These are three things the federal government has to do now in response to how serious the Omicron variant is. Rapid testing access, immediately accelerating access to the booster shot, and helping with hiring frontline healthcare workers immediately to deal with the crisis. Those are things that we're calling for. In addition, given the recent report that came out around inflation and the average housing costs having gone up 20%, the housing crisis is the next biggest concern on people's minds. In addition to the pandemic, people cannot find housing that's in their budget. And the federal government has completely failed to provide any real concrete steps to lower the pressures that are driving up the cost of housing. So again, we say the federal government, the Liberal government, Mr. Trudeau, has to start responding to the urgency of this crisis with similar actions that are in proportion to how serious things are. We want to see that ban on blind bidding, tax on property flipping, tax on foreign ownership, things that are going to help make sure that housing doesn't continue to go out of control, and real commitments to build more affordable homes. So those are some of the things that are on our mind. Donc, avec le variant Omicron, c'est vraiment une grande menace. Donc, on a décidé d'avoir notre rencontre avec notre caucus, notre équipe virtuelle, et on va avoir un nombre réduit des députés dans la Chambre de communes. Donc, c'est important de suivre tous les conseils des experts en matière de santé publique et j'exige toute la population canadienne, tous les gens, de suivre les conseils des experts. Deuxièmement, j'ai quelques mesures que je pense que le gouvernement fédéral peut prendre à ce moment pour aider les gens. Accélérer accès aux doses, troisième dose pour les gens. Deuxièmement, c'est important d'avoir accès aux examens rapides, rapid tests, ça c'est essentiel. Et troisièmement, c'est important de faire tout ce qu'on peut pour investir dans les travailleurs de santé de première ligne, d'embaucher plus de travailleurs pour faire face à la crise dans notre soin de santé. Donc, ce sont trois choses où le gouvernement libéral peut jouer un rôle, peut aider les provinces et territoires. Finalement, avec le rapport sur l'inflation, c'est clair que l'inflation frappe fort particulièrement avec le logement. C'est impossible de trouver du logement abordable. Donc, encore, on dit que le gouvernement libéral, M. Trudeau, n'a pas agi pour réduire les pressions sur le marché des maisons. Donc, le gouvernement libéral et M. Trudeau doit mettre en œuvre des programmes, des mesures comme une taxation juste sur les acheteurs étrangers, de bannir, de taxer aussi les gens qui flippent les maisons. Donc, on a des outils qu'on peut utiliser au niveau fédéral pour aider les gens. Et le gouvernement libéral a manqué le coup. Ils n'ont pas agi pour régler cette crise. Donc, ça, c'est aussi le deuxième grand enjeu, la pandémie et l'inflation, le coût de la vie, particulièrement manque de logements abordables. Donc, avec ça, je suis prêt pour vos questions. With that, I'm ready for your questions.
You said yesterday that you would support intervention in a federal court case on Bill 21. I just wanted to ask, is your caucus unanimous in its opposition of this? And is there anything that the party in general is going to do to oppose this more concrete action? Will you be visiting Quebec, for example?
I've nonstop visited Quebec since I was leader in the 2019 election. Almost every time I visited Quebec, this was a question that came up, and I've always said this is wrong, that a bill that discriminates people based on the way they look and the clothing they wear is wrong. And then the most recent example of Fatima of Arni really put a name and a face to what this impact is. A teacher was removed from the classroom for no other reason than the way she looked, the clothes she wore. And that's something that is completely wrong. And so we've taken a clear position that this is wrong, and we'll continue to point out how it's unjust. It particularly impacts women in a disproportionate way. And we want to make sure it's clear that we're supporting the millions of Quebecers, 3 million Quebecers who are opposed to this type of discriminatory law. And we would support the Quebecers who are fighting this law in court. That is what Quebecers are doing, and we would support them at the federal level. If it makes it to the Supreme Court, we would support them to support them in the fight against this discriminatory law. That's something that we'll continue to do.
I'd like to...
Oh, yes, and our caucus is absolutely united on this.
Could I just ask you, the Canadian Blood Services recommended today to Health Canada that they end the ban on gay men giving blood. I know you've said you support that, but I wondered if you'd care to comment, because it's just gone in today.
This is the right thing to do. And I can't imagine why the federal government, the federal Liberal government, Mr. Trudeau, has failed to act on this, despite knowing very clearly this is not in line with the science. There's no evidence-based reason for this. This is clearly a homophobic practice to arbitrarily ban gay men from providing blood and donating their blood is homophobic. There is no reason for it. There's no science. There's no scientific basis for it. And it is encouraging that the Canadian Blood Services has taken this position. But it's very discouraging that the federal government and Mr. Trudeau has failed to act on something that is so obviously, clearly wrong and needs to be addressed. And so we absolutely support the recent decision of the Canadian Blood Services, and we continue to put pressure on the federal government and Mr. Trudeau to bring in a lifting of this ban that should have never gotten to this point.
Operator, do we have a question on the phone?
Thank you. Merci. If you have a question, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad. Si vous avez une question, faites étoile 1 sur votre téléphone. There are no questions registered at this time. Il n'y a pas de questions pour le moment.
So we're going to take another question in the room.
I just wanted to follow up on what you said about inflation. I mean, you've said in the past that providing benefits is one of the answers to this. But are you concerned that that benefit bumps could actually increase inflation? And I wondered if you comment more on how you would deal with other things driving up prices, such as low crop yields, supply chain issues, global oil prices.
Well, we've heard from experts, economists that have stated really clearly that financial supports to people in need did not drive and does not drive up inflation. So that is misinformation and not the case from the experts that we've heard from. It is not at all driving up the cost. And in fact, if in a difficult financial situation, we don't provide help to people, what we have seen and will continue to see is a K-shaped recovery where those who were already struggling, those who are just getting by, people in the middle class, the working poor, they are in a worse off position as economic crises continue. And those who were well off, those at the very top, the ultra rich, continue to make more wealth. And we've seen that. We've seen companies increase their wealth in this pandemic, profit off the pandemic, and we've seen people struggle, and it become harder and harder to make ends meet for people. And that's why we believe very strongly that we need to continue to provide support to people. We need to make sure that they are supported through this difficult time so that we don't see inequality grow, that we don't see people that are already struggling be in a worse off position. And that's why we've been pushing to end the clawbacks to GIS for vulnerable seniors who rely on this financial support, and to end the clawback on Canadian child benefit to families that also need that support. Those clawbacks are hurting people. And while we can't directly control the cost of food, we certainly can provide supports to people so they can get through this tough time. We certainly can lower the cost of living in many other ways. That's why we've been saying the federal government can lower the cost of cell phone and internet fees. That's a concrete step we can take to lower the cost of living for people in this difficult time. We know that we can also take steps to make life more affordable with universal social programs like pharmacare, which would lower the cost of medication, dental care, which would help people cover the cost of caring for their teeth. These are some concrete steps that we can take. We could start with the telecommunications, though. It's fully within the federal mandate, and it would save families significantly, and it would help deal with the budget that's so tightly squeezed right now. Any help would mean a lot to so many families.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.